have asked you for a list of your most overrated and most underrated receivers in fantasy this season. We'll start with the overrated.
We'll start with the new addition to the Dallas Cowboys, George Pickens. It feels like the Cowboys have been searching for that number 2 wide receiver to pair alongside CeeDee Lamb for years. In fact, the last time they had a number 2 that I loved, I think it was CeeDee Lamb, ironically enough. But in reality, it's just Jake Ferguson. That's their number 2 wide receiver. Brandon Cooks was overrated in this spot. We have overrated Jalen Tolbert in this spot. It's always the same stat line that we're chasing. 650-ish yards, 7 or 8 touchdowns. That's good enough for a bye week replacement, a flex option in a deeper league, and nothing more. Pickens does have more talent than those guys, but he's also been the least professional of all of those players. Not exactly the type of guy that I am reaching for. I think more fool's gold than anything else. I also have Juwan Jennings on my list. Not huge on wide receivers that it takes 4 seasons to have a breakout year. Prior to last year, his career high was 416 yards. I do think he's a good player. He's just overvalued, and now he's trying to cash in on this opportunity financially. I don't blame him. He's the number 1 option in a pass game, until Brandon Ayuk returns to the field. Of course, George Kittle's still part of the mix as well, but it doesn't make him any more appealing in fantasy that he's worried about cashing a check. If he misses time in training camp, it's just more of a reason to fall in love with Ricky Pearsall. And then my final on the overrated list is your guy, Travis Hunter. I feel like a broken record at this point with Hunter. I've said this so many times on various shows over the last 2 months. I think I could talk myself out of Travis Hunter in my sleep at this point. He is a total wild card. And if he wasn't the college superstar, Heisman Trophy winning name that he is, this is not a situation that we would be buying into. He is maybe the number 2 in an offense that might be decent, and he's going to split time between offense and defense potentially, and they have a new head coach, and they have a bottom 5 offensive line, and a superstar wide receiver who's going to garner over 140 targets. Does that sound like somebody that we should be overdrafting?
My overrated receivers, Brandon. We start with Jameson Williams. He's going about the wide receiver 25 right now in fantasy drafts, about pick 50 overall. Look, he's the guy I'm most concerned about. If you're looking at some regression in a post Ben Johnson offense in Detroit, he's not the high volume guy that Amon-Ra St. Brown is. Obviously, the running backs are going to get theirs no matter what. I think you could sell me on a Sam Laporta bounce back season. But the mix of relatively low volume and then not being a red zone threat, that is a dangerous combination when we're talking fantasy football. Jameson Williams had fewer red zone targets last season, Brandon, than Demarcus Robinson and Deontay Johnson. I don't know who was targeting Deontay Johnson in the red zone, but they were doing it more than Jameson Williams. You do wonder if that creativity, if some of those big plays they were able to generate for Jameson Williams under Ben Johnson, did those dry up this season? He had 5 catches that went for at least 50 yards last year. 11 of his 14 career touchdowns, including the playoffs, have come from at least 30 yards out. 9 of those have come from at least 40 yards out. I need to see it before I believe it in a post-Ben Johnson offense. I also have Mike Evans on the list, Brandon. And I know this is probably sacrilege where you are in the state of Florida. He's the wide receiver 20 right now. You still have to take him inside the top 40. Look, 11 straight 1,000-yard seasons. I get it. He's been as consistent as anybody. But look at the splits for Mike Evans before Chris Godwin went down and after Chris Godwin went down. 6 games with Chris Godwin, he averaged roughly 4 catches for 48 yards. Godwin goes down, rest of the season, he puts up about 7 catches for 96 yards on average. It's just statistically unlikely that this continues when you're talking about a guy creeping up on his mid-30s. I'll be the anti-Mike Evans guy. If I get burned in year 12, so be it. And then the final receiver I have on my overrated list, Brandon, Zay Flowers. And this is a tough one. I love Zay Flowers. I love the Ravens offense, but to me, the ADP doesn't really match the production here. This is a guy who goes in that pick 45 to 55 range, right there with Jameson Williams. He finished as the wide receiver 25 a year ago, but it was a season where we saw a bunch of ups and downs, mostly downs, to be honest. He had 5 games, with fewer than 6 PPR points, only 4 what I would call true splash games, despite playing in an elite offense, one of the highest scoring offenses in the NFL, a career year from Lamar Jackson, 40 plus touchdowns. Zay Flowers finished as the wide receiver 30 or lower in PPR in 11 of 17 games last year. On a per game basis, he was the wide receiver 36. Yes, he led the Ravens in targets, but only had 4 touchdowns last season. Again, Lamar threw 41, and only 4 of those ended up to his number 1 wide receiver. He's just not a red zone threat your underrated wide receivers in fantasy this season?
It's a lot of year two post-hype sleeper types. I like Rome Odunze. You have 140 vacated targets from last year with Keenan Allen off the Bears roster. You get the built-in chemistry with him and Caleb Williams. I think he's going to really shine in year two. Marvin Harrison Jr. is another one. We forget how heralded this guy was coming out of Ohio State. Last year, he was just simply overdrafted, and I hate making the mistake of fading a guy because we as a fantasy community overdrafted him the year prior. He wasn't awful. He just wasn't what you drafted. And then Darnell Mooney, feels like this guy's been on this sort of list for years. He went from an anemic Bears offense to then Kirk Cousins, who got, he was washed overnight. Now he has the best deep ball passer in Michael Penix Jr. that he will have had in his entire career. So I like Darnell Mooney. Also over 750 receiving yards on the season. Not a bad way to look for him.
All right, I'm all in on Josh Downs, a guy you could still get after pick 100 in a lot of leagues. I know we're not fired up about the Colts quarterback position, but I think he's somebody who's going to emerge as their top target. Talked about Chris Godwin. If I'm out on Mike Evans, I got to be in on Chris Godwin. I would much rather pay the price on him as opposed to taking Mike Evans inside the top 40. And then I got to mention my guy, Jakobi Meyers, wide receiver 39 right now. This guy was wide receiver 19 last season. He has had Aiden O'Connell, Desmond Ridder, Jimmy G, Brian Hoyer, Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi as his starting quarterback so far in his career. All this guy does is beat his ADP, often significantly year in and year out. I think Geno Smith stepping in, this will be the best quarterback that Jakobi Meyers has had